So I start work on Sunday, so I've been busy learning about wines, beef, seafood, all that stuff, but I did manage to watch season 3 of Man in the High Castle. There's a lot I want to say. I'm going to talk about what I think worked and what didn't. Very light spoilers there. And then I'll get into the spoiler section. I'll talk about the major bombshells, what happened at the end. So if you want to skip right to that, I'll put a timestamp. Now, where I think the show is the strongest is when it's exploring the politicking and the backstabbing in the upper echelons of the Nazi hierarchy, or just exploring ordinary family life, what it would be like to be married and raise children in this environment. When it goes to the Juliana Crane is the chosen one and it tries to explore the multiverse, I just feel it's always at its weakest. Season 1, it ended with Tagomi, waking up in this alternate reality, and it was such a great moment because it was very unpredictable and you didn't know where it was going to lead, and it was very exciting. But ever since then, I feel that this whole sci-fi aspect has just been an anchor on the show, and there were times this season watching these different Nazi characters interact with each other that I saw a glimpse of just what an amazing show it could be. So some things that really worked. Nicole, initially you thought she was just going to be this generic love interest for Joe, who was never the most interesting character to begin with, but she rapidly this season became very engaging, very fun to watch, and seeing her rise up and try to influence the propaganda of the regime, have this relationship with Thelma, and then Thelma was kind of working with John Smith, and obviously Nicole and Joe had a thing, so you thought this was all going to come to a head, and this great, interplay of these different forces, and everyone's got their own agenda. But the storyline kind of puttered out a bit, and I'll get more to that in the spoiler section. And the Nazi propaganda mission of controlling American history, destroying all these American monuments. Himmler, he's given this speech about how this initiative, he calls it Year Zero, to fully march towards this glorious future. We have to completely destroy the past. And then they intercut his speech with this Jewish tradition being passed down for millennia, and such a strong tie to history. And I don't think it's a perfect comparison or particularly insightful, but I like that the show was at least trying to tackle what is Nazi ideology, why is it so toxic, how does it differ from other belief systems. So at least they were trying. And the other time I think they tried, and I liked, was Thomas's storyline last season. And Thomas, he wasn't in this season, but he was such a presence, just his beaming face at these memorials. It's just heartbreaking. And last season, when he gets this disorder that's through no fault of his own, and instantly, just because he can't contribute anymore to society, he's instantly tossed aside. It was just a great way of just not telling, but just showing just how toxic this kind of like social Darwinism thinking is. So I think when the show wrestles with Nazi ideology, even when it makes mistakes, it's at its strongest and most important at those times, and seeing the effects on ordinary people. We see the Smith family this season, Helen, dealing with Thomas, their son's death, start seeing this therapist, start the weird triangle forms with her, the therapist, and John. So it's these moments that are really good, and seeing a look at the Nazi hierarchy and seeing that obviously it's not a monolith where everyone's united, everyone has the same agenda, and they're just ruthlessly carrying it out. No, there's different factions that form, different power struggles, and even Himmler, I thought, was, as the Fuhrer, he was an improvement over season 1 of Hitler. Seemed like this almost omniscient, reality-traveling evil demon, which is probably not remotely what Hitler was like. Hitler was probably much more like what Himmler was this season. Kind of goofy, kind of over the top, kind of bombastic, not particularly scary, but also you get these little flashes of very cunning, very ruthless, and very terrifying and dangerous. So Himmler, in some ways it was weird because he wasn't particularly menacing a lot of the times, especially when he was being beamed over this little video intercom thing. He looked very, very silly, but oftentimes very silly people can have horrible, horrible consequences, and we see that. Really nice touch is we see these famous figures in American history. George Lincoln Rockwell, he's the founder of the American Nazi Party, and then J. Edgar Hoover, the head of the FBI. We see them rising up the ranks in the Nazi hierarchy. So it's an interesting thing in this alternate history, would these very powerful people be just as powerful, but they would just be on completely the opposite side, and it's kind of like their real allegiance is just rising through the ranks, and they don't really care what team they're on. They just want to get as high up the totem pole as possible. Now, the cinematography, I have to say, I think it worked for the most part. The darkness can be absolutely infuriating. It's hard when it's hard to tell what's going on. Every person's face is either half shrouded in shadow or completely in darkness, so it's like there's just a silhouette. of them, and it's incredibly gray, glum, grim. Every shot is just in darkness, and all the tones very muted. There's never any primary color, so it can become a bit of a drag to watch, but I think the overall grittiness, it works for the most part. I know it'll drive some people crazy, but I think it works, and some of the death scenes just really match this aesthetic. And there's this one where, rather than a firing squad, someone's, you know, strapped to a pole, and someone runs up and bayonets them, and then the next guy runs up and bayonets, and it's just absolutely brutal. And there were a couple of these death scenes that I thought, you know, with the aesthetic and then with these gritty death scenes, it was kind of a unique feel for the show, which is always nice. And then some interesting visual elements. There's all these spy attaché files, there's blueprints, some nice artwork and posters. There's a lamp that has a swastika on it, just these little subtle swastikas in the background sometimes. So there's that, and then some really chilling spectacles. They're opening up this high school for Thomas, the boy who died, and just a very chilling, you know, public spectacle where everyone's just united in this ideology. So visually pretty good, and an improvement over other seasons. And then Robert and Ed, they're kind of the comic relief this season, but they could do worse for comic relief. I thought Robert was very funny, and interesting kind of situation where he's selling this fake antique, and he's saying that it's, you know, something from John Wayne, and they're having this debate over whether John Wayne did his own stunts. So in this show about, you know, parallel realities and, you know, what's real and what's fake, you have him taking something that he's faked it, and he's saying it's by an actor who himself is playing a character. And then there's this debate over whether the actor who's himself playing a character, there's another character who people don't even know about that's actually the person in it that you're watching. So it's this kind of weird, like, 4 layers of fakery that I thought, I don't know if it was supposed to be kind of like a meta commentary on the whole central message of the show, but nonetheless, I thought it's interesting. And now for what I just don't think quite works, the whole sci-fi aspect. And it doesn't just work, I think it goes against some of the main themes that I thought at least the show was trying to say. So the show, I thought it was strong when it seemed to say that, you know, the Nazis weren't this otherworldly supernatural evil. They were somewhat, you know, ordinary like any other government, and they just slowly grew more and more evil. Certain factions got control and spiraled out of control into this horrible thing. Or saying that if the Nazis won the war, the world would be actually similar to ours in some very creepy and eerie ways. And what does that mean? What does that say about our world? What does that say about the Nazis? But when you make the Nazis this, not only wanting to take over the entire world, not being satisfied until the whole world, but not being satisfied until every other world is taken over as well, it just kind of plays into this idea that the Nazis are like this larger than life figure that are completely different than us and any kind of evil we could perpetrate. So it just seems weird that they keep doubling down on this multiverse idea. And then the central message of last season, the season finale, so Juliana, she kills Dixon, because if Dixon releases this tape and makes John Smith look bad, like a hypocrite for protecting his son, then the whole Nazi regime will crumble. But in that case, Thomas the son, he will also die, because before the Nazi regime crumbles, they'll kill him for having this disability. So she says, look, we can't let Thomas die. And Dixon's like, why? He's a Nazi. It's one Nazi. What do you care about one Nazi to bring down the whole regime? She says, no. So she shoots Dixon instead. And this is supposed to be this profound statement about how you can't fight fire with fire, and even if the Nazis are evil, the only way to resist them, rather than what the resistance did, which was bombing that building, the only way to resist them is through these irrational acts of just love, and just you love the Nazis and hug them, and then that reveals their humanity. But this season, it seemed like that weird message, it completely backtracked on it, and now the Nazis are this reality-hopping, evil, destructive force, almost preternatural force, and you do have to fight them, and you do need violence to stop them. So I'm always confused on quite what the show is trying to say, and never does that become more clear than when they really dive down into the sci-fi aspect, which again, I love talking about the multiverse, and it's interesting, but I don't think the show does it well as other shows that I've seen. Another thing I didn't think was great was how the Japanese and Nazi plots weren't integrated super well as they have been in past seasons, and there was an assassination plot that was supposed to unite the two storylines, but one, it seemed derivative, we've seen it before, and two, they didn't give enough time to it at all. We had this Nazi, super agent, but it just seemed like a mishmash of Joe, which we've seen, and also that bounty hunter that we saw in season 1, and we barely saw him at all, got to know him at all, so just very, very half-baked. And Tagomi, it's always fun to see him. He's a great character. He didn't get much to do. Kido had a decent storyline, but again, I just wish that they were more integrated into the main thrust of things. It seemed like they were sometimes just kind of this side story we were following, and there wasn't that sense of urgency. Now, I'll get to spoilers now. Joe dying. I have such mixed feelings because it was a great death scene. It was very surprising. It was emotional because Joe, he started off as you think he's a Nazi, and then he falls in love with Juliana, and you think he's a good guy. And then he seems to be waffling back and forth, and he meets his dad, and he hates his dad, and then he likes his dad, and then he betrays his dad, and then he gets thrown in jail, and there's just so much that we've seen with him, and even this season, you didn't know which way he was gonna go. He seemed to be blindly following orders, but then every now and again he'd hit a Nazi with a shovel. So he was just this fascinating wild card character. I just wish he was there for the finale. I just feel like, yeah, it was one of the best moments of the show when he died. It was such a great death scene, so surprising. But then when I was watching the finale, you can't help but miss him in the finale. So I feel, you always got to make those decisions, I guess, as a showrunner. You get a great moment, but you miss out on a great character in the finale where I thought he could have been really used well. And then the other major death, Frank, when we thought he died at the end of season 2, I didn't like it. I felt they never quite nailed his character, figured out what to do with him, and I was disappointed to see him go. I thought it kind of fell flat, his sacrifice. But then they brought him back this season, and he's working through his guilt, working through his issues, struggling with his spirituality. He's trying to start this peaceful rebellion that hopefully is going to be carried on by his loved ones, it looks like, next season. And he has this really nice but very emotional, very, very heartbreaking reunion with Juliana, and one, it just shows how far things have come from way back in season 1 when we first saw them together. We see just how much things have changed, and I think that Frank did find a degree. I think when the show began, he was very repressed and angry, and eventually that bubbled out into a kind of vengeance, and I think when he died, unfortunately he died, but he had achieved at that point a degree of acceptance and a degree of respect between him and Kido. Again, on opposite side, they're enemies. They had to be enemies, and Kido had to kill him. But I think there wasn't malice there, and I really liked that storyline. And John Smith, I liked how last season by the end he was just a full-blown hero, totally a good guy. And I thought they might have taken that a little far, and they pulled it back a bit this season, where you can be an evil person and still be really shaken by your son's death. You can be a really evil person, but if you're an American and you see the Statue of Liberty going up in flames and being blown to smithereens, you can still have an emotional reaction to that. Even if you fully embrace the Nazi regime, you're still going to feel, certain emotions and certain loss seeing these monuments be destroyed. So I thought you can show John Smith's humanity without making him a hero, and I think the show did a better job staying on that side of the spectrum this season. Now, I gotta talk about the multiverse, and I guess the purpose of the multiverse is to say that if you say, well, our universe is fine, so if that universe is in tyranny, who cares? It's not our fight. How is that any different than saying, well, our little ethnic group is fine, so if that other ethnic group is getting discriminated against, who cares? It's not our fight. Maybe that's the point they're trying to make and introduce it. I just feel like, so the big twist at the end, Juliana is like Tagomi and is now able to travel with her mind. And it's just frustrating because the book that it's based on, Philip K. Dick, it's the complete opposite of, I feel like, where they're taking it, where Juliana is the chosen one and this kind of angelic angel of light, and then she's against the Nazis who are determined to bring the entire multiverse, the entire universe, everything that exists into complete darkness. And it's kind of this primeval clash between good and evil, which is just not what the book, and the complete opposite of the message I think that the book was trying to say, which is par for the course with Philip K. Dick. He wrote Do Androids Dream of Electric Sheep. They adapted it into Blade Runner and then completely twisted the message, so it's the complete opposite. Amazon Prime, which also does this show, they did Electric Dreams, this anthology series, and one of the episodes was about telepaths, and again, just the complete opposite of the story that it's based on. So I guess I shouldn't have been surprised, but it's still disappointing. And some of the stuff we find out, that you can't travel to a reality where you haven't died yet, so you can only travel to realities where your death has kind of opened up this space for your essence to be there as well. We find out that the man in the high castle, he originally made a fake, which everyone thought originally. Everyone thought that these films were just fakes, and that was how they started. But then actual travelers, for whatever reason, actually came to him and started giving him real tapes that showed alternate histories. So, and there's this interesting debate over the relationship between you and the you in another reality. Are you the same person, or do you just happen to have the same physical characteristics? So when Juliana shoots Dixon last season, her sister isn't even mad because she's like, well, that wasn't my father. That was just someone who looked like my father in another reality. So I'm not really sad about it at all. So there is interesting stuff that the show sometimes explores, but I just find the parallel reality stuff, it's always frustrating. But that just might be my own bias. Anyways, I am going to stop the video there because I've been talking way too long. If anyone has watched all the way to this point, usually I do a really smooth ending, but I've been talking too long, so this time it's going to be abrupt. For the first time, I'm gonna abruptly end one of my videos.